Welcome to the Old Dirty History channel. Today we are going to talk about one of the most infamous and misunderstood monarchs in English history, King Henry VIII of England. If you would like more Old Dirty History, click that subscribe button and the notification bell at the bottom. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get this started. Henry VIII was born on June 28, 1491 to Queen Elizabeth of York and King Henry VII. Now, Henry was not an only child. He had two other sisters, and he also had an older brother whose name was Arthur. So although Henry would become king one day, initially, he wasn't meant to be king. Due to the line of succession and the way things worked back then, his older brother Arthur was actually meant to be king. And because of that, his brother was groomed literally from like the womb to be king. While Henry, during that period, he lived with his mom and his two sisters, and they were grooming him to join the church and live a more monastic life. Now, that doesn't mean that Henry wasn't given an A-class education or the same similar privileges that his brother was given. You know, we're still talking about a prince here. So he had some of the best tutors that money could buy, and he was very smart from, public accounts, different recorded things that we can access today. They say that he learned different languages and he was a bit of a prolific writer. He enjoyed music and writing music. And eventually, as he got older, he saw himself as a scholar. So he definitely enjoyed a privileged life while his brother was being groomed to be king. Now, eventually, Arthur marries, and he marries a young woman from Spain, and she's a princess. Her name is Catherine of Aragon. So young Henry and Arthur's father, Henry VII, decided that he wanted to form an alliance. So these two get married. They're teenagers. Everything is going great. They're in their honeymoon stage. And then not even a year after their wedding day, poor Arthur dies. And he dies from this disease that they call the sweating sickness. It's like the plague, but not really the plague. And what's really messed up is that the way that England got this disease was from Arthur and Henry's father. When Henry VII came over and took over England from Richard III, he brought this disease with him. So it's pretty messed up that his heir eventually dies from this in such a young age. So after Arthur dies, now all of a sudden, young Henry, he's forced into this role as heir, a totally new situation entirely. So he has to change everything. They change everything. Now he has to be groomed to be king. But unlike his brother, he didn't have the ability to start at such a young age. The other thing is we also still have Catherine here, Arthur's now widow. She's in England, hasn't left, and she's just sitting there, which I can only imagine must be awkward as because she was groomed to be a queen, literally from birth, just like her late husband was. And I just want to give you guys a little background on Catherine, just to give you a kind of sense of the type of woman she was when she was alive, because we're going to talk quite a bit about her relationship with Henry as we go on. So she was, again, a Spanish princess, and she came from an area that was very different from England. Just to give you an idea, when she came, she enjoyed taking baths every day, which to us doesn't sound absurd. That sounds like normal, right? But this was the 16th century, and England wasn't really quite there yet. So people would be like, what, you want to take a bath every day? Like, are you trying to get the plague? Like, you trying to die? Like, why would you do that? That's so weird. We bathe like once every 5 years, maybe 6 months if we're lucky. So she was very different from everyone else. And also, English was not her native language. And as far as her qualities are concerned, Catherine was a very pious woman. She valued God above everything. And it's so evident in the way that she carries herself as far as documented accounts and the things that she wrote and everything, and including images, paintings of her. She was just very pious. The other thing is she was very loved by the people. Queens, when they come in, they tend to be looked at as like outsiders because, of course, we're marrying for alliances and other purposes. So usually the queen was not from the country that they were queen of. So you have to get the people to love you and want you to be on that throne. Having their support is a great deal important. So she was very groomed for this position, and it was pretty much her life's aspiration. So her husband dies, and she's like sitting there and she's just like, what the heck do I do? This sucks. Well, young Henry's father, Henry VII, got it in his crusty old dirty mind. My wife died. We got a Spanish princess just sitting here. I think I'm gonna marry her. I think I'm gonna marry this young girl who's like 16 or 17 years old. That sounds good. But he doesn't. Thank God he doesn't. So he decides, I'll have my heir, young Henry, marry my late son's widow. That seems a little less gross to me. We'll go ahead and do that. So Henry and Catherine, they wed shortly thereafter on June 11th, 1509. And everything is going great. Young Henry and Catherine, they're wedded. It's said that at the beginning of the marriage, and for a good chunk of it, Henry truly did love Catherine. He adored Catherine. And she was a very, very supportive wife as well. I mean, the things that I'll talk about in these videos, because this is going to be like a series of videos, because he has a very long, extraordinary life and you can't do it all in one video. It said that she literally stood by this man's side up until the end of their marriage. She never spoke ill of him in public. She never wrote ill of him. So she was like the ride or die chick of the 16th century. Like, she really was, even though this man eventually does her dirty. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So they're happy, blissfully married. Everything is just going great. And then all of a sudden, Henry VII, young Henry's father, dies. You would think that people would be upset that this man died, but they really weren't. Like, they were so happy because this meant that young Henry could take the throne. And people loved Henry. Like, they adored him. Henry was literally the personification of a New England. They were happy. And honestly, they had every right to be happy, Henry VII, his dad, he wasn't like the best king. And the people didn't really love this guy. So just to give you a quick little recap of Mr. Henry VII so you understand where I'm coming from. When Henry took over England and took Richard III off of the throne, there were some people who were in support of him and there were some people who were not in support of him. Some of the people who were in support of him pretty much said, well, I mean, he was able to take the throne, so he good enough for me. Like, that'll do, pig, that'll do. But there were some people who felt like that wasn't enough. So the problem was that Henry's claim to the throne, it was like real scarce. Like, it was small. His connection, he was like so far removed. And there were other people whose had their bloodline was much more connected to the throne. So he had threats. And this made him a very paranoid person. There were also pretenders pretending to be certain people that could literally threaten his throne. There's one specific act that Henry VII did that really stands out in my mind when I think about this man. And that is his wife, Elizabeth of York's cousin. So she had a cousin when Henry VII came in and took England, who was like around 10 years old, right? So this young man he had a great connection to the throne. Like, he was like a major, major threat. So Henry VII, he doesn't kill him, thank God, right? But he does imprison this young boy in the Tower of London for the rest of his life. I mean, he's so young. And one can only imagine how Elizabeth of York, his wife, must have felt. Like, that's her blood, that's her cousin. And she has to know and watch this young boy be imprisoned for the rest of his life. So he stays in prison in the Tower of London for a long, long time. I think up until like his early 20s. But then when Henry decides that he wanted to form that alliance that I talked about between England and Spain, where he marries Arthur with Catherine, there was a stipulation that Spain gave Henry VII in order for that marriage to happen. And that stipulation was that Henry VII had to kill Elizabeth of York, his wife's cousin, who has now been in prison for at least a decade. And the reasoning makes sense. I'm applying a modern perspective on this, of course. And it's a cutthroat world out there for monarchs back then, you know. It makes sense that Spain wanted him to get rid of this young man because even though this boy wasn't a threat, even though he isn't speaking out or trying to rally people to support him, he still had supporters, even in this tower. And the way Spain saw it was, well, we don't want our baby girl to be at risk, right? Like, we don't want anybody coming in to support this mofo and take her crown or kill her or imprison her. Like, we need to make sure that your is stable, because Spain was aware, just like everyone else, that Henry VII's claim to the throne was so small. So they didn't want to take that chance. So what does Henry do? He marches the young guy down, and after imprisoning him for over a decade from childhood up, he kills him, he executes him. Done deal. That's it. So, you know, it just gives you a bit of an idea of who this man was. And he also taxed the out of his people, and they hated that. So, understandable. The people didn't really like this guy. He was a bit ruthless, and he was extremely paranoid, and he had a small group of people that he trusted, that he kept in his ears, pretty much. Henry VII is dead. Everyone is happy. Henry takes the throne. He's got Catherine by his side. Everything is going great throughout their marriage. And like I said, you know, Henry really did love his wife. And they go, okay, so now what's the next step? Now it's time for us to have an heir. So over the course of 8 years, Catherine tries to give Henry an heir. She has 6 births during this 8-year period, I believe. And of those 6 births, only 1 child survives. And that would be Mary, who would one day become the first Queen of England, depending on who you ask. So she gives birth to Mary, but it's not enough for Henry. He needs a boy, he needs a male, because women can't rule by themselves at this period. I don't agree with it, but this is the way things were back then. There were like a few like random instances throughout history, but for the most part, you know, Elizabeth I, she wasn't there yet, you know, where she would prove everyone wrong, including her own father, Henry VIII, our young Henry. But Mary wasn't enough. He supposedly loved his daughter, but he wanted a boy. And this had to be, I can imagine, very devastating and rough for Catherine to deal with, because you've had 6 births over the course of 8 years, with almost all of them being miscarriages, or the baby dies shortly after birth, like a month or even less later. So one can only imagine how this severely affected her mind, her body, her spirit. Like, as a woman, I can't even begin to imagine. And I'm sure that, of course, this affected Henry, right? But this is the woman who is charged with giving not just Henry, but the realm an heir. Like, as a queen, you have specific responsibilities, obligations. And the number one obligation that Catherine knew she had was to give England an heir. And one can only imagine how upset she was, because, like I said, she was groomed from a child up to be queen, and she knew that this is what she had to do. And, you know, she felt like I can imagine she probably felt like she was failing at her job, especially when you have a husband who eventually just gives up on you. And that's exactly what Henry does. He gives up on Catherine. And over the course of several years, Henry has so many side pieces. Like, he has a lot of them. And through those side pieces, he has illegitimate children over the course of these relationships with these side pieces. And what's even more messed up is that it's not even like he keeps it back in the shadows or anything. Like, he is flaunting these relationships with these side pieces in front of Catherine, in front of everybody at court. I'm not saying that he's like laying them on the bed and doing his due diligence in front of Catherine. No, but he makes it obvious. And then he's even giving titles, like prestigious royal titles, to these children. So this is a complete slap in the face for Catherine while she's trying her hardest. The other thing is, Catherine is a bit older than Henry. And as a woman, you know, as time goes on, it becomes harder to give birth. So it's just a really messed up situation that she's in. And then to make matters worse, your husband isn't even by your side at a certain point. Like, one can only imagine. So we're going to stop here and we'll pick back up for a part 2. I wish that I could do everything in one video, but Henry, again, very complicated man, had a lot of wives, a lot of crazy shenanigans happen. So we're going to cover it in at least 3 or 4 videos. So until next time, bye.
Perfect.